Kwame sat at the long wooden table, the smell of fried plantain and light soup filling the room. He was 23, the youngest in the family, and the only one without a flashy job title or car parked outside. What no one saw were the endless part-time shifts he worked, the unpaid internships he took just to learn, and the late nights he spent chasing small coding gigs online. He had tried everything: selling airtime on the streets, running errands for neighbors, tutoring kids, anything that could put a little money in his pocket. But in his family's eyes, effort didn't matter. Only results did. That night, as laughter circled the table, his mother Ajoa fixed her sharp eyes on him. "Look at you," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the chatter. "A failure who brings no pride. Your cousins are building houses, driving cars. And you? At 23, what have you done?" Her words landed like stones. The room fell into an uneasy silence for a moment before the relatives burst out laughing, shaking their heads as if she had simply spoken the obvious truth. Kwame's father stayed quiet, staring down at his plate. His silence was worse than the laughter. It felt like agreement. Across the table, his sister smirked, adding, "Maybe one day, when you finally figure out life, we'll clap for you." The words stung. Kwame swallowed hard, trying to hold himself steady, but inside he felt smaller with every chuckle that echoed around. That dinner was not just food. It was humiliation served hot. Kwame sat there, forcing a smile he didn't feel, but inside his chest was a storm. His mother's words replayed in his head like a song he couldn't turn off. A failure who brings no pride. It was louder than the laughter, louder than his sister's mocking voice, louder even than his own heartbeat. He tried to chew the food on his plate, but it felt like stones in his mouth. Every bite tasted like shame. He lowered his eyes, pretending to focus on his food, but his mind drifted to all the nights he had gone hungry so he could save just a little more. He remembered sitting in his small rented room, drinking only water because he had sent most of his money home, hoping it would help keep things together. Nobody saw those sacrifices. Nobody knew the times he walked instead of paying for transport, sweating under the hot Kumasi sun, just to keep a few coins safe. Nobody ever asked. His chest tightened as he thought, "Am I really worthless?" If his own mother, the woman who raised him, believed he was nothing, maybe she was right. He had worked so hard, tried every small hustle he could, but what did he have to show? No car, no house, no fancy job title. Just tired eyes, calloused hands, and a heart that was beginning to feel heavy with doubt. The laughter around the table kept going, but in his head it sounded like echoes in a tunnel, bouncing off the walls of his thoughts. He remembered those long nights coding in silence, staring at a laptop with a cracked screen, pushing himself even when his stomach growled from hunger. He remembered the bus rides where he was a conductor, standing for hours, his hands blistered from grabbing the rails. He remembered selling airtime under the hot sun, swallowing his pride as people brushed past him like he was invisible. Now here he was, invisible again, but this time to his own family. He wanted to scream, to tell them everything he had done, every sacrifice, every coin saved, every pain endured. But his throat refused to open. Instead, he just sat there, silent, letting their laughter crawl under his skin. He felt like he was disappearing into the chair, shrinking smaller and smaller until maybe no one would see him at all. In that moment, his mother's words became more than just insults. They became doubts carved into his soul. He wondered if maybe all his struggles were meaningless, if maybe he really was chasing shadows. The question wouldn't leave him. Am I really worthless? And for the first time in years, Kwame wasn't sure of the answer. Long before that dinner table humiliation, Kwame had been fighting battles no one saw. At just 18, when most of his friends were busy chasing fun, he was standing on street corners under the scorching Kumasi sun, selling airtime cards. He would shout himself hoarse just to earn a few sadies. Some days he came home with barely enough to buy food, but he still forced a smile and told everyone he was fine. When airtime sales slowed down, he became a bus conductor. It wasn't glamorous. Shouting stops, squeezing into packed trotros, and arguing with passengers who didn't want to pay the full fare. He came home with his shirt drenched in sweat, his palms rough from holding the rails all day. But to him, it was honest work, and it kept him going. At night, when the city finally grew quiet, he would sit in front of an old laptop with a cracked screen, teaching himself how to code. His eyes burned with tiredness, but he pushed himself because he believed that one day, these hours would pay off. Then came the hardest test. His father suddenly fell sick and had to be admitted to the hospital. Bills piled up fast and the family panicked. His mother cried, his sister complained, and relatives promised help that never came. No one knew that Kwame was quietly pulling money from his little savings. He had been stashing away every coin he could from his side hustles, and now he used it all to pay for his father's treatment. He never told anyone. To them, it looked like some miracle had happened, or maybe his father just got lucky. Kwame didn't care about the recognition. He only cared that his father came back home alive. But in his family's eyes, Kwame was still the lazy one. He didn't own nice clothes, didn't take pictures at restaurants, didn't drive a car. His cousins posted shiny photos on Instagram, smiling with their new jobs and their fancy suits, while Kwame was always in old jeans, walking to save transport money. They assumed he had no ambition, no direction. Nobody asked why he looked so tired all the time. Nobody wondered where the hospital bills got paid from. He carried all of it in silence, believing that one day the truth would speak for him. But silence can be heavy, especially when everyone treats you like you're the weakest link. And so Kwame walked through each day like a shadow in his own family, misunderstood, overlooked, and quietly carrying a load that would break most people. What they never realized was that behind the quiet young man they laughed at, there was someone who had been holding the family together with nothing but grit, sacrifice, and the family house had always been the one thing that kept everyone together. It wasn't the biggest or the fanciest in Kumasi, but it held memories: Kwame's childhood laughter in the yard, his father's radio playing old highlife songs, and his mother's cooking that pulled neighbors in. But beneath all of that warmth, a storm was quietly building. The bank had sent letters, bold red stamps on white paper, warning that the house would be seized if the mortgage wasn't paid. Ajoa, Kwame's mother, hid the letters deep inside her room. She couldn't let the relatives know. To her, it was too shameful. She still walked around proudly at family gatherings, acting like everything was fine, even though she knew the home her children grew up in could be taken away any day. When the postman came with another notice, she would quickly fold it and slip it away before anyone else saw. At night, she would sit on her bed, the paper trembling in her hands, praying that somehow a miracle would come. Kwame, however, had already found out. He had seen one of the letters by accident when his mother left it on the table. His heart sank, but he didn't say anything. He knew what it meant. Losing the house would break the family completely. Everyone would scatter, and his parents' pride would crumble. So quietly, without telling anyone, he went to the bank himself. The bank manager was shocked to see him. To them, he was just a young man with no power. But Kwame spoke firmly, asking for time, asking for options, showing them his records. Over the years, while everyone thought he was wasting his life, he had been saving. Every side hustle, every unpaid internship that eventually led to a small gig, every long night coding for strangers online, it all added up. He had managed to save close to $100,000. It wasn't easy for him to let it go. That money represented years of sweat, hunger, sleepless nights, and sacrifice. He could have used it to finally start his own life, to buy land, to build his future. But when he thought of his father sitting on the porch, his mother in the kitchen, and the laughter of his sister echoing in the halls, he knew the house meant more. So he signed the papers and handed the money over. The bank manager shook his hand and promised the house was safe. Kwame walked out quietly, with no one beside him to say thank you. He didn't go home and announce it. He didn't even tell his mother. He just carried on as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, Ajoa still hid the empty envelopes in her room, not knowing her son had already saved them all from losing everything. Kwame's sacrifice was invisible, but it was powerful. While everyone called him a failure, he was the only reason they still had a home to gather in. The reunion dinner was supposed to be a happy evening. The long dining table was full of jollof rice, roasted chicken, fried yam, and bottles of soda. Relatives filled the house, their voices loud, their laughter bouncing off the walls. The air smelled of celebration, but to Kwame, it felt heavy. He sat quietly at the end of the table, listening as his uncles bragged about their children's jobs and his cousins boasted about their latest travels and new cars. For most of the evening, Kwame kept his head down, eating slowly. He knew what was coming. It always came. And just as he feared, his mother's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Look at your cousins," she said loudly, pointing across the table. "See how successful they are. See how much pride they bring. And you? Nothing. 23 years and still nothing to show." The laughter was instant. His uncles chuckled, shaking their heads as if to agree. His cousins leaned back smugly, pretending not to laugh but failing. His sister smirked, adding fuel. "Maybe one day, if he's lucky, he'll catch up." The whole room erupted, and the sound pressed against Kwame's chest like a weight. His heart pounded so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. His palms grew sweaty, his throat tightened, and his eyes burned with tears he refused to let fall. He wanted to defend himself, to tell them about the nights he coded until his eyes blurred, the mornings he skipped breakfast just to save money, the $100,000 he had given up to protect the very roof over their heads. But his tongue refused to move. Words sat heavy in his mouth, trapped by pride and exhaustion. So he stayed silent. He sat there as their laughter echoed around him, every joke carving a new scar into his heart. He looked at his father, hoping for some kind of defense, but his father kept his eyes on his plate, chewing slowly as if he hadn't heard a thing. That silence hurt even more than his mother's insults. Kwame's vision blurred. He blinked quickly, forcing the tears back, determined not to let them see him break. But inside, he was crumbling. Every sacrifice, every hidden act of love, every hour of struggle, they had all vanished in this one moment, erased by his mother's cruel words and the laughter of his family. The food on his plate had lost its taste. The room felt colder, even with all the warm bodies around. His chest rose and fell, heavy, as if he was carrying the weight of everyone's judgment. He didn't speak, he didn't argue, he didn't explain. He just sat there quietly, breaking piece by piece, realizing that sometimes silence can be louder than screams. That night, Kwame learned what it truly meant to feel invisible in your own family. The laughter was still ringing in Kwame's ears when his mother's phone began to buzz on the table. At first, no one paid attention, but the caller's name flashed clearly on the screen, bank manager. Ajoa's face tensed. She hesitated, then answered, putting it on speaker so everyone could hear. The room grew quiet as the manager's cheerful voice filled the air. "Good evening, Madam Ajoa," the man said warmly. "I just wanted to call personally to thank your son, Kwame. Please tell him again that the payment went through successfully. Your family's mortgage of $100,000 has been cleared in full. You no longer have to worry about losing your home." The words hit the room like thunder. Forks froze in midair, conversations died instantly, and the laughter that had filled the house just seconds ago vanished into stunned silence. Every head at the table slowly turned toward Kwame. His mother's eyes widened, her lips parting but no words coming out. His father looked up for the first time all evening, his face pale with shock. The bank manager kept speaking, unaware of the tension he had just created. "Kwame has been such a responsible young man. Honestly, it's rare to see someone his age handle such a big responsibility with such discipline. Please extend my gratitude to him again. Your family is safe because of him." Then the call ended. Silence. The kind of silence that weighs heavy, pressing against everyone's chest. You could hear the sound of a spoon dropping into a plate, the faint hiss of the soda bottle on the table. No one moved. No one laughed. They just stared at Kwame as if they were seeing him for the very first time. His sister's smirk disappeared. His uncles, who had been bragging just moments ago, looked away, ashamed. The cousins who had laughed at him shifted uncomfortably in their seats. His father lowered his head, unable to meet his eyes. And his mother sat frozen, her hands trembling on the table, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words but finding none. Kwame sat quietly, his face calm though his heart was still racing. He hadn't planned for this moment. He never wanted recognition, never wanted anyone to know. But now the truth was out, laid bare in the middle of the dinner table. The failure they had mocked was the same one who had saved them all from losing their home. The air in the room had shifted completely. The laughter was gone, replaced by shame, shock, and something heavier, respect. Every eye was on Kwame, and for the first time, no one had anything to say. The moment the call ended, the room was still. No laughter, no teasing, no clinking of glasses. Just silence thick enough to choke on. Ajoa's hand shook as the spoon slipped from her grip, landing in her bowl with a dull splash. Her eyes were fixed on Kwame, wide and unblinking, like she was seeing a stranger sitting at her own table. Around the room, the relatives began to murmur in low voices. The same mouths that had laughed at him seconds earlier now whispered in disbelief. "Did he say 100,000? One uncle. "Kwame?" another asked, as though the name itself couldn't possibly belong to the hero the bank manager had just praised. His cousins sat stiff, their smiles gone, their eyes darting nervously, ashamed that the one they mocked had done what none of them could. Kwame's father didn't say a word. He simply lowered his head, staring at the floor as though the weight of his son's sacrifice pressed on his shoulders. He had always chosen silence when Kwame was insulted, but now that silence turned into guilt. His lips trembled, and his hand gripped the edge of the table, but he couldn't bring himself to look up. Kwame sat still, his face calm, though his chest felt heavy. He had carried this secret for so long, bearing the insults in silence, and now the truth had come out in front of everyone. He glanced around the table, at the same people who had laughed at him minutes ago, their expressions now twisted with regret. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Failures don't save home." The words were simple, but they landed harder than any insult ever had. His mother flinched as if he had struck her. His sister's smirk vanished completely, replaced by guilt she couldn't hide. His uncles, who had once been so loud, now kept their heads bowed. No one could meet his eyes. The truth hung in the air like smoke, impossible to escape. Every sacrifice he had made, every sleepless night, every coin saved, every meal skipped, suddenly took shape in their mind. They realized that while they had been mocking him, he had been carrying their family's burden on his back. The lazy boy, the failure, had been the one holding the roof over their heads. Kwame didn't raise his voice, didn't boast, didn't explain further. He simply sat there, his calmness louder than any defense he could have made. The shame belonged to them now, not him. And in that moment, everyone at the table knew it. The same people who once laughed at Kwame now struggled to even look at him. And for the first time in years, he wasn't the one shrinking in his chair. The weight of Kwame's words hung heavy in the air. Failures don't save homes. The sentence echoed in everyone's mind, but it hit Ajoa the hardest. She sat frozen, her hands trembling on the table. For years she had scolded him, insulted him, called him useless. She had compared him to every cousin, every neighbor's child, never once stopping to ask what he was going through. Now the truth was staring her in the face, and it broke something deep inside her. Her lips quivered as tears filled her eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Kwame, my son." She pressed her palms against her face and began to sob, the kind of sob that shook her whole body. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others watching with guilt in their eyes. The proud woman who always held her head high at family gatherings was now collapsing right at the dinner table. She reached out with shaking hands, her tears dripping onto the table. "Forgive me," she cried, her voice raw. "Forgive me, Kwame. I didn't know. I didn't see. I didn't understand." Each word was heavier than the last, a confession she had buried for years. Kwame sat still, his eyes soft but tired. He had dreamed of this moment before, his mother recognizing his worth. But now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt painful, like an old wound being pressed open. Still, he couldn't ignore the sight of his mother crumbling before him. Ajoa pushed her chair back and stumbled toward him. For the first time in years, she wrapped her arms around him tightly. Her sobs soaked into his shirt as she clung to him like she was afraid he might disappear. "You carried us," she whispered between tears. "All this time, you carried us alone. And I called you a failure. Oh God, forgive me." Kwame stiffened at first, not used to this closeness. His mother hadn't hugged him in so long that he had forgotten what it felt like. Slowly, his arms lifted and he held her back. The room stayed quiet, the relatives too stunned to speak. Some wiped their eyes, others lowered their heads in shame. For years, Ajoa had been blind to the sacrifices her son made in silence. She hadn't seen the hunger he endured, the nights he worked until dawn, the money he saved to keep a roof over their heads. But now she saw it clearly, and the truth shattered her pride. The embrace lingered, filled with regret, pain, and a love that had been buried for too long. In that moment, mother and son were both crying, not just for the hurtful words said, but for all the years lost in misunderstanding. And for the first time in a long time, Ajoa held her son not as a failure, but as the strength of the family she never recognized. The news spread faster than wildfire. By the next week, everyone in the extended family had heard about Kwame. Aunties who once mocked him at weddings now whispered his name with respect. Uncles who used to brag about their own children now told others. It was Kwame who saved the family house. Neighbors who had seen him walking quietly to work, wearing the same old shoes, began greeting him differently, their voices warmer, their eyes softer. The same people who once saw him as the poor dreamer were now calling him the rock of the family. Relatives who had ignored him before suddenly wanted to sit closer to him at gathering. His cousins, who once laughed at his struggles, now praised his discipline and asked him for advice. Even strangers came up to him in the neighborhood, shaking his hand and saying, "You've done something great. You've shown us what true strength looks like." The whispers of failure had been replaced with words like hero and blessing. But Kwame didn't let it get to his head. He still walked the same way, still wore the same shirts, still lived simply. When people congratulated him, he only smiled and said, "It wasn't about me. It was about saving the family home." His humility only made people admire him more. They couldn't understand how someone who had just sacrificed so much could still remain so calm, so grounded. One afternoon, a group of younger cousins gathered around him, their eyes full of curiosity. "Kwame," one of them asked, "how did you manage to do it? How did you save so much?" He looked at them, smiled gently, and said, "Discipline, sacrifice, and patience. But most importantly, you have to understand that success isn't always loud." The words stuck with them. They were used to seeing success in flashy cars, designer clothes, and big celebrations. But here was Kwame, a man who had been called a failure for years, proving that true success could be quiet, hidden in late nights, empty stomachs, and private sacrifices no one clapped for. Even his mother changed. Ajoa now looked at him with pride, introducing him to visitors as "my strong son." She no longer compared him to his cousins. Instead, she often said, "We are standing here today because of Kwame." His father, though still a man of few words, would sometimes rest his hand on Kwame's shoulder, a silent gesture of respect. Kwame accepted their new admiration, but deep inside he carried the memory of those painful dinners, the cruel laughter, and the silence that once crushed him. He didn't seek revenge, didn't rub the truth in their faces. He only lived by the words he repeated whenever someone praised him. Success isn't always loud. Sometimes the strongest people are the quiet ones you overlook. And for the first time in his life, people finally listened. Kwame turns his head slowly, looking straight into the camera. His eyes are calm, but you can still see the weight of everything he has carried. For a moment, he doesn't speak. He just breathes like he is gathering every scar, every insult, every sacrifice into one last message. Then his voice breaks the silence. All my life, I was called a failure. My own family laughed at me. My mother compared me to everyone else. I was invisible in the place I should have felt seen. But the truth? Sometimes the ones you call failures are the ones holding you up. He leans forward slightly, his tone softer now, almost like he's speaking directly to the heart of whoever is watching. You don't always see the nights they go hungry, the jobs they take just to survive, the sacrifices they make in silence. You don't see the battles they fight when no one is clapping for them. And yet, without them, many families would fall apart. A tear rolls down his cheek, but he doesn't wipe it. So before you laugh at someone, before you compare them, before you call them useless, remember me. Remember that sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying the heaviest load. He pauses, his eyes glistening but steady. Success isn't always loud. And love is sometimes hidden in silence, in sacrifice, in things you may never notice until it's too late. Kwame leans back, his voice breaking but firm. So look again at the people you call failures, because without them, you might not even be standing. The screen fades to black, leaving nothing but his words echoing in the viewer's chest.